Tennessee in June of 1999, defeated John McCain in the primaries, and was nominated almost unanimously by the Republican convention. Al Gore was the Democratic nominee and was heavily favored. Political scientists meeting in Washington that summer decided that Gore was a shoo-in. But Gore fumbled. He chose Joseph Lieberman, the most conservative Democrat in the Senate, as his running mate, ostentatiously snubbed President Clinton, and did poorly in the 3 television debates with Bush. The choice of Lieberman and the snubbing of Clinton gave third-party candidate Ralph Nader an opening on the left. He would ultimately poll almost 3 million votes, and the election came down to Florida. Gore failed to carry 10 states that Clinton had carried in 1996, any one of which would have put him over the top. He didn't even carry his own state of Tennessee or Clinton's state of Arkansas. The Supreme Court ultimately decided the issue when they accepted the count submitted by the Secretary of State of Florida on December 12th, some 35 days after the election, and Bush emerged as a winner. Let me say, and I say it in the book, I believe, that Bush is superb as a politician seeking votes. But he had no executive experience. He had very little knowledge of international affairs, had rarely traveled abroad, a short attention span, and genuinely believed that he was God's agent. With the exception of selecting Colin Powell as Secretary of State and Don Rumsfeld as Secretary of Defense and his friend Don Evans as Secretary of Commerce, he delegated the selection of his cabinet and other top-level federal officials to Dick Cheney, and closeted himself in the White House with his staff from the governor's office in Texas, plus Condoleezza Rice as his national security advisor, and Andy Card as the chief of staff. If you think about it, it is inconceivable that Franklin Roosevelt would have trusted John Nance Garner to pick his cabinet and sub-cabinet in 1933, or that Eisenhower would have trusted Nixon. As a result of Cheney's input, Bush took office with the phalanx of sub-cabinet officials, powerfully motivated, and already equipped to provide the intellectual justification for the president's policies. These men were conservative in outlook and really very articulate. They were like-minded ideologues and longtime friends, people like Scooter Libby, Paul Wolfowitz, and Elliott Abrams. Cheney played a very important part during Bush's first 2 years. He had an office in the White House. His staff became White House staff. The administration's position on energy, the tax cuts of 2001, and after 9/11, the decision to try captured al-Qaeda members by military commission all reflected Cheney's input. But over the years, his influence faded. Initially, Bush devoted himself to domestic issues. The United States under Clinton had run a budget surplus for the last 3.5 years. Clinton applied the surplus to reducing the federal debt. Bush insisted that the surplus should be returned to the taxpayers. You recall during the election, he repeatedly said, "It's your money." Treasury Secretary Paul O'Neill, Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, all wanted a trigger in the act which would have canceled the tax cuts if the budget surplus disappeared. But Bush said no. And at Bush's urging, Congress enacted one of the largest tax cuts in American history. He signed the legislation in June, and in July 2001, the budget surplus ended. Bush also pressed for education reform that first year. No Child Left Behind, which Congress enacted, has been a valuable service, particularly for children from disadvantaged families. Bush rarely touched foreign policy issues that first year. when he did, it was with a determination to assert American supremacy. The Clinton administration and South Korea had worked very hard to bring North Korea back into the family of nations. The United States and South Korea would provide economic assistance to North Korea, and in return, the North Koreans would abandon their nuclear program. Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State under Clinton, visited Pyongyang in December of 2000, after the election but before the inauguration. Korean President Kim Dae-jung came to Washington in March of 2001 to put the final touches on the deal. North Korea was on the verge of renouncing nuclear weapons and concluding a peace treaty with South Korea, and Bush rejected the idea. The North Koreans were evil, he believed. The government must be replaced. This was a personal decision taken by the president. You might think back to that time and remember how Colin Powell was called off base when he said the deal was going through. This was Bush's personal decision. He also rejected the Kyoto Protocol on global warming, Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the International Criminal Court, and an International Convention on Biological Weapons. The attacks of 9/11 were a surprise, but merely reinforced Bush's view of good versus evil. And in many respects,